committee is meeting on its study of the Canada-People's Republic of China relations with a focus on the Canada-Taiwan relations. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of June 23, 2022. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. I would like to offer the following as we get into tonight's session. Please wait till I recognize you by name before speaking. And for those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you're not speaking. Interpretation for those on Zoom, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen, that little planet icon there, of either floor, English, or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. For members in the room, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. For members on Zoom, please use the raised hand function. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best we can, and we appreciate your patience and understanding in this regard. One thing to the committee members, we will actually have a very short business session at the end of our testimony tonight. We just have one item of notice on the calendar that we may have to make an adjustment for. I'd now like to welcome our witnesses for the first section. From the Taipei Economic and Cultural Office in Canada, Dr. Harry Ho-Jen Zeng, Representative, Brian Chow-Lu Ping, Executive Director, and Ethan Han-Ming Chen, Executive Assistant Director. Mr. Zeng, you have 5 minutes for your opening statement. Welcome to the Canada-China Committee.
Thank you. Honorable Chair, Vice Chairs, and members of the Special Committee, good evening. It is my great pleasure to be invited to attend today's hearing. In my view, there can be a better timing for such a hearing, especially in the wake of the CCP's 20th Party Congress, which concluded less than 2 weeks ago. The political report delivered by Mr. Xi Jinping on October 16th has sent a chilling message to all of us in the like-minded group, and I would like to explain why closer ties between Taiwan and Canada now will be more important than ever. The CCP has seen Xi as a paramount leader for his third term and beyond. The new Politburo Standing Committee makeup has killed all hopes for economic prospects for China as well as the world. The reaffirmed zero-COVID policy remains a major risk for growth. There is no hope of loosening regulations on internet platforms, and its real estate industry sees no policy U-turn, etc. In short, Xi's idea of common prosperity will push China further away from the world market. While there are still debates over what is the best strategy to deal with China, decoupling or engagement, I think the answer is getting more and more clear. For years, China has set ambitious targets for its economic growth. But as the Congress concluded, its spokesman said that growth figures would no longer be important from now on. The CCP has instead stressed equality over prosperity. Effectively, it spells a return to a communism not unlike the era under Mao. By doing so, China is accelerating its self-initiated decoupling in the name of self-sufficiency and self-dependency. Canada, like any countries in the world, should beware what awaits in the future. Taiwan and Canada are like-minded partners. We share the same values of freedom, democracy, respect for human rights, and the rule of law. The shared values and beliefs are the pillars of our comprehensive ties and are manifested in various aspects of our bilateral relations, including our actions to support Ukraine in its fight for freedom. As you know, peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait has been challenged recently. China used the U.S. House Speaker Pelosi's visit as a pretext and launched a large-scale military exercise to intimidate Taiwan. In this critical moment, Foreign Minister Melody Joly, Defense Minister Anita Anand, and Trade Minister Mary Ng stood out, respectively, to urge China to refrain from escalating its military threats. We appreciate such timely gestures from Canada alongside other like-minded countries, and we believe Canada should do more. For one thing, it's mutually beneficial to promote trade and investment between Canada and Taiwan, and to jointly build a resilient supply chain among democracies. Our two-way trade surpassed 10 billion Canadian dollars in 2021, a growth of 39% from 2020. It ranks Taiwan as Canada's fifth largest trading partner in Asia. Taiwan is Canada's 16th largest export market globally. Therefore, Taiwan's CPTPP membership and Foreign Investment Protection and Promotion Arrangement, FIPA, with Canada will no doubt bring our economic relations to a new height and reinforce our supply chain resilience. For another, to deter authoritarian states from making any irresponsible actions, Canada can reiterate and demonstrate its staunch commitment to maintaining peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. I hereby urge the Canadian government to stand with Taiwan and support our position as follows. Number one, Taiwan stresses that preserving peace, stability, and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific is of substantial interest to countries in the region and urges Canada to continue supporting the development of peaceful relations across the Taiwan Strait through constructive bilateral and multilateral mechanisms. Number two, Taiwan insists that all disputes in the Indo-Pacific should be settled by peaceful means on the basis of international law, and no country should take unilateral actions to change the status quo, and calls on Canada to urge the PRC to refrain from further military actions across the Taiwan Strait.
Mr. Zhang, that will conclude your, actually a little bit more than your 5-minute opening statement. If you have further points to make, though,
Mr.
you'll
Chair,
be able to work them in. Yes,
Point
sir.
of order.
Yes.
Could I get unanimous consent for the representative to just finish his statement?
We're good? All right. Mr. Zhang, please continue.
Thank you. Number three, Taiwan aspires to participate meaningfully in relevant international organizations and activities so as to make its due contributions, and urges Canada to continue assisting Taiwan in that regard and help promote cross-strait dialogues which is conducive to the region's peace, stability, and prosperity. Thank you all. I'll be glad to answer your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zhang. And as we get into our first round of questioning, I'd like to welcome Mr. Courig to the committee this evening. You're here for a good time, not a long time, I understand, but that's fine. I hope we show you a good time tonight. So for our first 6 minutes, we'll go to Mr. Chong.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Ho-Jin Singh, for appearing in front of our committee. You mentioned in your opening remarks that there's a debate going on about decoupling versus engagement with, on the part of democracies with the People's Republic of China, and that the answer is becoming more and more clear. My question is, do you believe it's time for democracies like Canada and Taiwan to decouple economically from the People's Republic of China, particularly in the 5 sensitive areas of critical minerals, semiconductors, biotechnology, telecommunications, and artificial intelligence?
Thank you, sir. I think, in my view, decoupling is indeed happening, like it or not. And some of it comes from China itself, as it was indicated very clearly in the 20th Party Congress's political report. So even though it is already ongoing for a few years, it's the steps is continuing, is ongoing. So I think it is only wise to be prepared for a economic decoupling to come closer and come faster.
Thank you. I appreciate that answer. On October 15th, in an interview with the Toronto Star, you warned that global leaders should be careful about lending credibility to the narrative being pushed by the People's Republic of China that recent visits to Taiwan by foreign legislators, previously treated as routine, are now provocative. In what ways have government leaders been lending credibility to the PRC's narrative that visits by legislators, such as those from the Canadian House of Commons, are intended to provoke the PRC?
The way I see it, the visit of the parliamentary members to Taiwan, no matter it comes from Canada or from the other countries, is a matter of fact for many years. It only stopped because of the pandemic, because of the regulations of border control, making it difficult for such routine to happen. But as most of the countries in the world decided to live with the virus and the border controls regulations lifting up. So I think we welcome to see more parliamentary delegations to come to Taiwan to show their support to Taiwan. And of course, the visit of the Canadian parliamentary members just a few weeks ago turned out a great success. The way I see it here in the media and media in Taiwan are all very positive, maybe except some official response from the Chinese embassy here. But I think it is very clear their purpose is to promote trade and investment with Taiwan. And from the program they went through in Taiwan, it demonstrates that purpose very much.
Do you believe that these visits are reducing the chance of a war between the People's Republic of China and Taiwan in the sense that they increase the cost to China of starting such a war?
I do think so. I do think that the visit of foreign dignitaries or politicians to Taiwan to show their support is something, I'm sorry to say, is something the PRC doesn't like to see. The reason they want to stop this kind of visit is because they don't want the world to show their support for Taiwan. Their explanation is more support to Taiwan would perhaps encourage Taiwan to go for independence, but it's totally not respecting the fact going on in Taiwan. There's no way, it's not in the policy of the current government, it's not in the policy of the previous government that Taiwan want to seek for de jure independence. That is not our policy.
Thank you. I appreciate that answer. Just a final question. You've said recently that President Xi, who's just secured a precedent-breaking third 5-year term, will now use this third term of his to force Taiwan, through military means, to come to the table. As you know, Canada promised exploratory talks with Taiwan on a foreign investment and protection and promotion agreement last January, 10 months ago, but has yet to say whether it's ready to start those talks. You've called on Ottawa to begin negotiations on free trade with Taiwan as a demonstration of support for Taiwan. So can you tell us how important it is that these two things begin, the negotiations on a foreign investment protection and promotion agreement and free trade talks, in order to increase, not just for the mutual economic benefit of our two countries, but also in the view that it increases the costs to the People's Republic of China of invading Taiwan?
Thank you, sir. I think there are two pillars in Taiwan supporting Taiwan's continuous development, economic development or national development as a whole. that is economic growth. A robust economic growth is very important to Taiwan because that will support us to better build our self-defense capabilities. And this is why we emphasize so much that FIPA between our two countries and the CPTPP among the Trans-Pacific partners will be very important for Taiwan. We have been working pretty much on our own to develop a robust economic growth, but we are coming into a new age that doing on our own would be more and more difficult. We need to work with the partners, especially the like-minded partners. So I think this FIPA, in a way, the FIPA stands for Foreign Investment Protection and Promotion Arrangement. In a way, it is a free trade agreement in different names. And so it's important for us very clearly. This is self-evident. The CPTPP also, we have applied to join the CPTPP September last year. And this is a high standard of a trading bloc, higher than those set by the World Trade Organization.
Mr. Zhang, I'll have to interrupt you there. Mr. Chong is out of time for his portion of the questioning. We'll now go to Mr. Fragaskatos for 6 minutes or less.
Can go ahead if there was more. Okay.
It's okay.
In your opening remarks, you talked about resilient supply chains between democracies. I think it's a very important and compelling point that's being made. I wonder if you could expand on that with reference to how Canada-Taiwan relations, particularly economic relations, obviously, how that would fit in, what that might look like, intertwining supply chains more, and where we can see that happening in the relationship between our two countries.
Thank you very much, sir. I'm not an economist, but from what I understand, your Minister Champagne mentioned just a few days ago about building an economic belt from New York to Montreal. And I believe he's seeing the strengths of Montreal as an AI designing center. And this new economic belt perhaps is looking at the EV, electric vehicle. Well, it only came to my understanding recently that in a traditional car that we drive with a traditional fuel, fossil fuel, it needs, every car needs just 18 chips. But in an electric vehicle, EV, every vehicle needs 250 chips. So the requirement for chips would more than 13 times more than a traditional car. Well, you are very good at AI ecology, AI ecology, to combine different AIs in a very nice design. We are very good at making chips. I think if we can have that kind of cooperation, that potential for cooperation is so high. If we can work together using the strengths of Taiwan's chip making and then your strengths of AI designing, and we can really bring our economic relations to a new height.
It's a very interesting point, and relates to my second question, which is on the second track of diplomacy, as it sometimes is called, the people-to-people ties that can sometimes strengthen relations. Can you talk about that? Can you talk about the linkages that exist in education, in business? I also understand there's engagement happening on indigenous issues between Canada and Taiwan. I wonder if you could highlight that, your view, and to what extent it could help boost the intertwining of supply chains. Even you had a specific example there, but I think it's the second track of diplomacy is always helpful in advancing major goals.
Thank you, sir. It's very inspiring to me. I think the people-to-people diplomacy or what you call the second track diplomacy is really the backbone of the relations. You cannot have a political relation without people-to-people relations. It will be so weak. It's so vacuous. And so this people-to-people diplomacy or engagement has somehow been affected by the pandemic. Well, we are looking back only 2 years or 3 years back. You would be confused exactly how our people-to-people contact has changed so much. But if we go back to before the pandemic, you will really see that the number of tourists coming from Taiwan to Canada and vice versa is really growing, and this is a country that is so welcome and so well received in Taiwan. In Taiwan, it would be very common if you find any family have one member or a friend of the family who has some connections in Canada. They either have a relative or friends or classmates in Canada. And this perhaps is why even under the pandemic this year we have two ministers visiting Canada. One is our overseas compatriot affairs minister. The other is our Aboriginal affairs minister coming to visit Canada. And both of these deals with actually people-to-people relations, popular affairs. It is not so much talking about the issues that I mentioned, or either security or trade. So it's one indication to tell you that people-to-people relations between our two countries are indeed very comprehensive and very, very deep.
If I had more time, I think our chair is giving me that look, and I don't think I have more time. But if I did, I would ask you about disinformation and the way that materializes in Taiwan as a result of China's efforts, and what Canada can do to help Taiwan with disinformation. But perhaps there'll be an opportunity to raise that in the meeting, or if other colleagues want to put it on the table. So thank you very much for your time.
We did actually give a fair bit of latitude to Mr. Chong. So, Mr. Zhang, if you would like to answer that fairly briefly, that would be just fine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, in terms of disinformation, this is something we are encountering on a daily basis. Disinformation in Taiwan mostly come from China. And it's becoming so easy for disinformation to spread because the social media and everyone has a cell phone now. And so we developed a strategy to counter balance the negative effect of the disinformation. It's a very comprehensive way to tackle it. I don't think I have enough time, but we actually bring in the government spokesman system as well as our intelligence gathering systems to discern what are the fake news going on in the social media real time. Because if you let fake news go viral for like 10 minutes, it's already too late. We learn from our experiences. And I think this is actually the area we think that we can share with you and share with the other countries in EU. For example, in the, yes.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Zhang. We will have time. Actually, there's extra questioning time for all of our committee members this evening. So that sounds like a fascinating area that you may wish to spend a little more time on as we proceed. Mr. Bergeron, I'll say 6 minutes or less, but if you have a good question, we'll let you have a little extra time too.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je ne doute pas. Thank you, Chair. I'm sure that I will have questions which will fascinate my colleagues. But please appreciate our thanks for being here this evening. We're very grateful. I thought that I understood from my colleagues' comments all of the solidarity that we feel with respect to Taiwan and its people. In a Globe and Mail article on 25th of October, you said that part of your work as a Taiwan representative in the Taipei Cultural and Economic Office is, and here I'm quoting approximately, to not allow war to happen by convincing Western countries to increase the costs to the People's Republic of China if they try to take the island. And you said, if you want to help Taiwan, talk less and act more. Approximate quote. In translation. As an introduction to my question, I would like to tell you about an exchange that I had with people from Ukraine a few days before February's invasion. At that time, even people in Ukraine thought it was highly improbable that there would be an attack from Russia, because they felt that the cost to Russia would be too high. And we see that this is the case, but despite this fact, it did not prevent Vladimir Putin from invading Ukraine. Because what seems to us something reasonable is not necessarily within the same logic of somebody such as Vladimir Putin. Similarly, to what extent would the price be high? How high would it have to be to prevent someone such as the president of Xi Jinping of the People's Republic of China from doing the very same thing? So when you say talk less and act more, what are you expecting from Canada?
Thank you, sir, for this question. You are right. It is really very difficult to predict what a dictator would do. Very unpredictable, the mindset of a dictator. It applies to Mr. Putin. It looks like China is becoming more and more under one man's control, as that is the result out of the 20th Party Congress. So it will be very difficult to predict what Xi Jinping is going to do. My job here is not to let a war happen, as you said. That's very true. But for decision makers in Taiwan, we have to prepare for that worst kind of scenarios. So it is always not a question of if, but a question of when. It's written in their political report, not only this time, but also 5 years ago in their 19th Party Congress, that they would like to have a unification with Taiwan, to consider that as the rejuvenation of a great Chinese nation. So this is already in their roadmap, and it is not a question of if, it's only a question of when. So we need to get prepared from Taiwan. And as to how would we like Canada to help Taiwan, we are pragmatic people, and we know where your policy stands now. The 3 points I mentioned in the concluding part of my remarks is actually what we are asking of you. We know we cannot expect you to do what the U.S. is doing with us, but I think if you take some time to look into the 3 points, a conclusion of my opening remarks, those are something I think pretty much within your current policy. And let's say, when I say less talk and more action, I hope it is not taken to be mistaken by our friends here. I don't mean to criticize the Canadian government, but I think there are more that can be done. when I say less talk and more actions, I'm actually referring to the trade, FIPA. We have been talking a lot about FIPA. We probably need to sit down and really talk about the nitty-gritties, the issues, negotiation, and give and takes, like any serious trade and negotiation. That is what I'm talking about. I'm actually not referring to for security issues. But there is one thing Canada is doing a lot. At least once a year, you have your naval ships going to go on the free passage exercises, including from the high sea of the Taiwan Strait. Given the high tension between China and Taiwan right now, I think it would be very welcome if you can continue to do this, a free passage of the high sea. If you can increase times to do that kind of naval exercise, it would be very much appreciated by our side, because that would mean that you are demonstrating your commitment to keep peace and stability in this part of the world.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. According to the Democracy Index of the Intelligence Organization, Taiwan is 8th in the democracy classification, 4 spots from Canada's ranking. In a recent talk in Washington, Deputy Prime Minister emphasized, according to CBC, that we should stop supporting autocracies such as Russia and China and focus on trade and investment in countries of democratic allies. Now, Taiwan does have expectations from Canada, considering the FIPA, the Foreign Investment Protection and Promotion. Do you think that negotiations are proceeding at a satisfactory pace to be able to arrive at a conclusion in a reasonably wished-for time frame?
Answer, please, Mr. Singh.
Thank you, sir. I think that the FIPA is going on the positive directions. What we need is a political will for both sides to sit down and talk. And we are hopeful that some major steps can be demonstrated on both sides. There is a momentum there on both sides. And I have hope that with the current momentum from both sides, we can really push the FIPA forward.
Merci.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Bergeron. Now to Ms. McPherson for 6 minutes or a little more.
Ish. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the representative for being here today. Of course, it's lovely to see you again. I wish I could be there in person. And thank you, as always, for informing this group of parliamentarians, for making yourself available for meetings with me regularly. Thank you so much for that. And I do want to say that we see Taiwan as a strong democracy, as a democracy that shares many of the same values that Canada shares. The support for Indigenous reconciliation, environmental care, democracy, support for women. The work that Taiwan is doing on the Sustainable Development Goals is admirable, and I think I've expressed to you before that I wish we were as far along on the SDGs in Canada as certainly as you are. In Taiwan, one thing that I would like to get some more clarity on, we all watched with some trepidation what was happening in China during the National Congress, the 20th National Congress. You speak today about it being a chilling message that you've received from that. I wonder if you could talk about your thoughts a little bit more about what we heard from that National Congress. What does that mean for Taiwan? What did you hear from that? And what does that mean for the rest of the world and for Canada in particular, please?
Thank you, ma'am, for your question. I think what is happening in China now is going to affect every country in the world. I think it indicates that the China as a market is getting more uncertain. It's getting riskier for Canada and for other countries because we will be trading with someone that lays stress not on profit but on political control, and this is really very worrying for us. We continue to see that the zero COVID policy was very much firm in the Chinese Communist Party's policy. And the Chinese leaders are very adamant on this point. It is not doing any good to the Chinese economy, and I think that is something we need to be very much aware. And I think for Taiwan, it carries something further, that something may not be strongly felt here in Canada, or I hope it can be better appreciated as time goes by. That is the security issue. Many people have already read the report that this time in the political report, more than 75 times Xi Jinping used the term security. They think that China is under the internal pressure seems come from the external intervention, and that is a security concern for them. And the more China stresses security, the more it will look inward, and the tighter will be the political control. And this is already showing their effect in China, and I think that is a message that should be taken by all of us, and to be better prepared for any kind of possible consequences.
Thank you. Well, and we are seeing that. I mean, even just recently, representatives from CSIS were at the Procedure and House Affairs Committee talking about how they are increasingly concerned. You know, you speak of China's influence within China being more internal, but the influence of China spreading and the disinformation campaigns that we're seeing. Obviously the reports of police stations, electoral influence, impacts on our media. Threats to Canadian Chinese. Those are all things that are happening. Do you have any comments on how Canada should, or what Canada should be doing to ensure that those threats are mitigated?
Again, I think that this disinformation campaign that you felt in Canada perhaps is only one part of the Chinese effort to expand their influence abroad. Here, the way that China does their control abroad by extending their judicial powers into a third country, that is very concerning to us. As a matter of fact, in Taiwan, we are facing a similar kind of challenge. Disinformation campaign in Taiwan, as I said just now, is a part of our life because this is the way that China tries to infiltrate into our society. Even today, as we seen what has come out of the 20th Party Congress, China, in the mind of their political leaders, they think that taking away Taiwan without fighting a bullet is the cheapest way to do it. And the way for that to become a reality, they need to use all kinds of cyber attacks, the gray zone tactics, and hybrid threats, all kinds of possible approach, and including the disinformation campaign. Fortunately, this is a process of socialization. There is a social education in Taiwan to tell our people to better concern the news when it comes to you. You probably need to find it out that this is not true. And why would we be able to do that? Because there is a government policy to set up the so-called fact check centers. So in our social media, if you are suspicious of a certain news and consider it maybe malign and suspicious, you can just throw the news into that fact check. It is only an IP address. You check, and then it will come back to you immediately to tell you that which part of the news report or which part of the story is untrue. And it can come back very quickly because there are chances are so many people would have the same suspicion. So when the same news is thrown into this fact check center, it would learn to get the facts by itself. So we learn to do that, and this is something we actually can share with the other countries. And so all in all, I think what China is doing is against the norms and the rules of the international community. No matter it's a police station in a third country or disinformation campaign of any kind, I think it is only to go against the good governance. And I hope that we can work together.
Thank you, Mr. Zhang. We'll pause now and turn it over to Mr. Seeback for 6 minutes.
Mr. Zhang, you have talked about the FIPA, and you say that we need more. There needs to be strong political will, and I know this is a delicate subject. It seems to me that you have the political will. That you want us, this to move forward expeditiously. Is there a lack of urgency on the part of Canada to get that agreement done?
Thank you, sir. I think before I answer this question, I must report to you, ladies and gentlemen, that the relations between our two countries are moving in the right direction. Well, there is an increasing improvement between our two countries, including the relations in the economic and investment issues. And we understand that FIPA and the CPTPP, they are very complicated issues. We are talking to each other on very good faith. 3 times, beginning from January this year, we already have conducted 3 exploratory discussions. Both sides are very happy about the result. We are waiting to move on to the next phase, and that is why we think that there must be some kind of determination to come for this to go through. And I understand that trade matters needs to go through different sectoral concern, and that you want to make sure you are not signing some agreement at the expense of your business community. We understand that. But if you don't talk, you cannot see that you have achieved the goal of not getting your people sacrificed. And so what we are asking from Taiwan is that we sit down and have a real talk, not the prior talks before the real talk. So don't never fear to negotiate.
You would like to see more substantive talks on the FIPA then?
Right.
Okay. And so I know some of these questions you don't want to, talk in a negative way about someone you're working in agreement with, but this committee has to make recommendations. So I am asking some questions that might be maybe a little uncomfortable. With respect to CPTPP, so all countries involved would have to agree with your accession to the agreement. That's my understanding. And China's also applied for the CPTPP, very close in time with yourself. What can Canada do to move forward your application? And in particular, are there particular countries we should be speaking with to try and help get that unanimous consent for that application to move forward?
Thank you again. I think we both sides know that very well. CPTPP is a multilateral platform. So as I'm talking to you, all the other colleagues of mine in different missions, they are talking to their counterpart as well. And to get the multilateral support, we start from bilateral support. So we are asking you, I am asking the Canadian government to show that at least your gesture, a positive gesture of welcoming Taiwan to apply for the CPTPP. And then the CPTPP would, at the right time, they will set up a working group and to discuss our accession issue. Right now, of course, the only issue under discussion is the UK's accession issue. We understand all that. But what we are asking for CPTPP, for you to understand and support, is that we are able to meet all the high requirement, the high standard of the CPTPP, and let our trade people to decide whether that is up to the standard already. It has to be that kind of conversation, that kind of consultation before you decide that Taiwan is up to the job or not. So we are asking for a fair chance.
Yeah, is Canada supporting your application? Do you know? Has Canada made their position clear on your application to the CPTPP?
We get very polite response from Canada, and we understand, as I said, all the 11 members of the CPTPP are devoting their time to the UK's accession issue, and all the other issues, including China's application, is put on the shelf. We hope it will be something more forthcoming in terms of our application. And our application should not be regarded side by side China. I mean, it should be on the credit basis that we can join, and then we can on our own merit.
And briefly, I know I have very little time. How can Canada help with the pressure that's being put on nations to not have formal recognition, having recognition with Taiwan, like Lithuania, for an example, is under some trade sanctions from China as a result of their bilateral relation with you? How can Canada help with that?
And again, please, sir, a very brief answer.
Well, Lithuania relations with Taiwan is very unique. And they continue to talk to Taiwan, and we help them to weather through the difficulties that China used the economic coercion as a retaliation for their receiving Taiwan's new office in Vilnius. I think that is not the case that we are facing between Canada and Taiwan.
Thank you very much. Now to Ms. Yip for 6 minutes.
Thank you for coming this evening. Canada has consistently supported Taiwan's meaningful participation in global discussions, where Taiwan's absence is noted. Global health and civil aviation are two recent examples where Canada has advocated for Taiwan's participation. Can you provide us with an overview of the role Canada plays to support Taiwan in this regard, and how important it is for Taiwan to, your voice to be heard globally?
Thank you, ma'am. As a matter of fact, Canada has played a very important role in support of Taiwan's international participation. And you are the people behind that support. I'm referring to the 3 motions passed in the committee in this parliament. Only this year, 3 motions from different committees have passed the motion in support of Taiwan's international participation, and 1 motion is from the whole House. You probably don't know that each and every passage of this motion has been widely reported in Taiwan. It is so much cherished and embraced by our people to know that Taiwan, we do not stand alone, that we have support from Canada. please don't belittle this effort that you put in your parliamentary work, because this kind of morale for a country like Taiwan is really important. And this is why when the recent parliamentary delegation visiting Taiwan, in different meetings of theirs, they received our gratitude, our appreciations in many different meetings. They came back with a very strong feeling that the parliament is really doing something to help Taiwan.
Sorry to interrupt you, but for our viewers at home, can you just tell us what the 3 motions are?
Oh, the motions. The motions passed in the different committees here are mostly in support of Taiwan's participation in the World Health Organization.
Thank you. Sorry, were you going to say more on this issue?
The most important message I am trying to convey is that Canada has played a very important role, and we hope that there will be more supportive gestures to come out of the Parliament, and I appreciate the assistance from the individual members, including many here tonight.
Thank you. In your opening statement, you talked about peace and stability in the region. What can Canada do to ensure that peace is maintained across the Taiwan Strait?
Again, just like in the CPTPP, Canada cannot do it alone. In maintaining peace and stability in our part of the world, Canada is a very important country to make a contribution, but you are not making it by yourself. I think we have mentioned like-minded countries a lot, including in my opening remarks. A like-minded country is a very loose concept. It needs a leadership. I think the leadership is most logically come from the G7 countries. And Canada, US, and Japan, you are representing some areas of like-minded countries. And the other 4 out of the G7 come from Europe. They are also leading the like-minded countries in that part of the world. I think it's very important that Canada voice their support or voice their concern from the G7 foreign ministers joint statement or G7 summit that peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait is of utmost importance to the world. And the more you reiterate that kind of position, the more China will think twice, because they know that this is defying the international aspiration for peace and stability in this part of the world.
Canada is, it's already been mentioned by my colleague, Mr. Fragiskatis, that it's ranked 4th in terms of a study destination. What are some of the challenges that you see in Taiwanese students in Canada and Canadian students in Taiwan?
Yes, indeed, Canada is one of the most favorite countries of destination for our young people to come over for a higher degree, for a broader study. It has been interrupted by the pandemic, and those exchange programs between the universities has to suspend for in some cases for 3 years, not only 2 years. I very much hope that this kind of exchange programs can resume as quick as possible. I think from the government point of view, we would like to facilitate the students from Canada to go to Taiwan to study, and likewise from Taiwan to Canada. There are also other vehicles, the other projects that can help this kind of study to increase. I'm talking about the working holiday programs. We have a working holiday programs between us that is working very well, because every time, I'm talking about before the pandemic, hopefully now in the post-pandemic era, it would resume to the situation like before. And this is a project for the young people of two countries between 18 years old and 35 years old to travel to each other's country without needing a work permit, but you can working holiday programs. And because this kind of friendship nurtured when people are young, they tend to carry on the friendship for the rest of their life. It's very, very good, and it would facilitate more young people to come to each other's country for higher study.
Thank you, Mr. Cheng. Thank you, Ms. Yip. That's your time. We will now, in the second round, Mr. Bergeron and Ms. McPherson, you'll each have 5 minutes. So your 5 minutes starts now, Mr. Bergeron.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. On the October 17th in the Devoir, you said that from Taiwan's point of view, we would like to see senior members of Canada's cabinet visit Taiwan at an opportune moment. I was quoting from what you said in the French article. Now, the last Taiwan visit was 1998 when John Manley, who was the Liberal Minister of Industry at the time, made such a visit. Why would a ministerial visit be important for Taiwan?
Thank you, sir, for the question. Why the minister's visit is important to Taiwan? I think it's because a minister's meeting doesn't come easily. For any minister to visit a country, they probably would have some lower-ranking officers to visit, and then usually there's some concrete result out of the minister's meeting. So in our foreign service, minister's meeting has something that cannot be replaced by a visit of low-ranking officials. This is why it is not really symbolic in that sense. A minister's meeting would always carry out something concrete, something useful for the bilateral relations. And this is why a ministerial visit is very welcome by Taiwan.
Croyez-vous que l'une des raisons pour lesquelles
Do you believe that one of the reasons for which no minister has gone to Taiwan since that last visit is because of a fear of reprisals from the People's Republic of China? And what sort of reprisals would Canada be exposing itself to if a minister were to decide to go to Taiwan?
The response or the retaliation from China with regard to a potential, as we are talking about a hypothetical situation, right? I think that would include a strong démarche from the Chinese embassy here, and some officials in the GAC would have a hard time, receiving perhaps a very harsh response from the Chinese officials here. That is perhaps most commonly seen. The other thing that I can really think of the carve is really maybe a cancellation of a potential Canadian visit to China, those on the schedule. So that is a possibility, to the best of my knowledge. So again, it needs some courage. It doesn't come lightly, but it will be an important decision for you to make. We, from Taiwan's perspective, we certainly will welcome this kind of visit, ministerial visit. And to be honest with you, we can be very creative. We can receive your ministers, like the visit of Minister John Manley in 1998. His visit didn't cause any serious repercussions. And as a matter of fact, he came back to Canada and to tell his friends that he didn't feel any pressure as a result of his visit to Taiwan. the pressure may be more before he went than after he came back. So I hope we won't be scared by our own concern, because it is only we stand up to our moral courage. That is what I see it.
Si la principale représaille à laquelle
Now, if the main reprisals that Canada could expose itself to were to be the cancellation or delay in a visit that was already scheduled between Canada and the People's Republic of China, I think that we wouldn't be exposing ourselves to very much, because to the best of my knowledge, for several months now, there haven't been many visits planned on either side. Now, let's moving out of the hypothetical sphere.
Are out of time, unfortunately. 5 minutes goes twice as fast as 2.5, it seems.
Was I entitled to 2.5 minutes or 5? 5, and you had your 5.
You will get another opportunity, so hold that question.
Merci.
Ms. McPherson for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Very interesting questions on ministers traveling to Taiwan, and of course, as you know, we are looking forward to the Indo-Pacific strategy being released and getting more information about that. I just wonder how you would feel, Mr. Tsang, if this committee was able to, as part of our visit of the Indo-Pacific region, if we were able to visit countries within the Indo-Pacific region, whether or not you would welcome members of this committee coming to Taiwan for a visit.
Oh, without a doubt, the visit of the special committee with the members here would be more than welcome in Taiwan. And I believe it will be conducive to the final draft of the Indo-Pacific strategy.
Thank you. And then one of the things that I was wondering about, so you were very, very clear on those 3 things that you have asked Canada to do, and thank you for that clarity. I would like to have a little bit more understanding of how the Canadian government has responded to that to date. I know you've talked a little bit about some of those places where you would like them to move a little bit further, some of those areas where I think you can say that the government has done a good job, and we can be grateful for the work that all of parliamentarians have done supporting Taiwan. But in terms of the Canadian government response to those specific 3 asks, is there anything else you'd like to flag for us of things that the government could be doing more on those specific things?
But to be honest, when we drafted these 3 points in these opening remarks, I didn't have a prior consultation with your officials. The way I see it is consistent with your existing policies is because as you can see, what is stressed here is really to preserve peace, stability, and prosperity. It is advocating for a multilateral assistance for the peace and stability to be maintained in that part of the world. It is asking you to help the status quo to be maintained and calling for countries to watch very closely that no country should take unilateral action to change the status quo. All this, I think, falls very well under your current policy. In no way, I think it is contradictory to your policy in terms of regional security in our part of the world. And the 3rd point of the statement is talking about the meaningful participation of Taiwan in relevant international organizations. And it's even more so that you have shown your support in this regard. As I said, motions has passed in the committee and in the House in that regard. So I hope that these we can reach an agreement on these points that I have raised here, and if there are more actions that we can do together, it is more than welcome.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think that this is one of the things, you know, we want to see Taiwan at these international fora because, of course, there's much we can learn from Taiwan. You know, the response to COVID-19 in Taiwan was so strong at the World Health Organization. We can learn from that. The way that you have dealt with the Sustainable Development Goals and your international development efforts, you know, you should be able to bring those lessons to the United Nations to be able to share those with other democracies across the around the world. I do wonder, though, you know, as we look at how Canada can be supporting peaceful relations and peaceful dispute resolution, do you feel that the Canadian government has been strong enough in their language on those two things? Do you feel that the government has taken the opportunity to raise their voice enough at this point?
I have discerned an increasing improvement in our bilateral relations. And I know that it will take time for a policy to shift, but I think that is happening. There's more that can be done in our bilateral relations. And I think we will be keep our mind open, and we would like to take up any possibilities, any opportunities to talk to the officials in charge, to talk to the decision makers, and also to talk to the members in the parliament. So that is something that we are doing sometimes quietly with you, and hopefully that the environment in the world is changing very rapidly. Something that we used to do slowly but surely perhaps need to speed up a little bit. I hope we can have some consensus in that regard, and then to move things up in a faster manner.
Thank you very much. Thank you. All right, now we have time for one more round. 5 minutes each for Conservatives, Liberals, 2.5 minutes each for the Bloc and the NDP. I do not have a name from Mr. Kimmich? For 5 minutes then, sir.
Thank you, Chair. You had spoken about people-to-people relationships. And so I was going to ask you, are you aware of any cases of intimidation of visitors from Taiwan coming to Canada who are being intimidated or persecuted by either representatives of the PRC, agents of the PRC, individuals working for United Front Department?
Thank you, sir. From the information that I have access to, we still don't have any Taiwanese nationals or the Taiwanese Canadians living in Canada being intimidated by a Chinese diplomat or Chinese nationals but working in Canada. But we heard a lot, and it's been reported that people from Hong Kong has been under that kind of threat a lot. There is a target of those people that they want to nail down from China. Those are the dissident that the Chinese Communist Party would not be happy for what they have been doing because they see it as a threat. Even though Taiwanese nationals in Canada has not faced this kind of intimidation, but just a few years ago, there's Taiwanese nationals advocating some ideas of democracy. When he was in Taiwan, using his computer as a platform to spread the idea of democracy. But when he traveled to China, he was taken custody, and he was sentenced to 5 years. And his name is Li Mingze. He was released only about a little bit more than a year ago. So it is not happening in Canada. If there is, I would certainly share with our friends in the Parliament to let you know.
Thank you. So I was going to ask you then about the so-called police stations. You've probably heard these stories. I believe it's Fujian province calls them service stations. Does your government allow the operation of such service police stations on your territory?
It's unheard of, totally out of the question for this kind of service station. It's actually in the name of an association, but it's semi-official because it carries some functions that only government branch can do. And in Taiwan, it's totally impossible for this kind of a police station or service station to be set up, especially set up by Chinese nationals.
So how would your government react if you found such police stations operating on your territory? What would your recommendation be to the government of Canada?
As far as I know, these police or service stations have existed in 24 countries and 52 stations of them in 24 countries, but none of them were found in Taiwan. And the way we do it, I think we will have a very, we will be very vigilant, if I may put it that way. The reason we can fight the pandemic in a very efficient way is because we have been vigilant from day one. And we have to be vigilant all the times for those actions under camouflage from very, it will be under a name of some kind of association or a social or society, things like that. But we have to pay attention to those actions that just cannot conform to our legal system.
Mr. Kimmich, I'm sorry you are out of time. Thank you. Now to Mr. Dubourg for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair. And that's my turn to welcome all witnesses from the Bureau économique et culturel de Taipei au Canada. And I'd like to say to Mr. Singh, I was so pleased to see your introduction speech, especially by the end, because at the end, your conclusion, you talk a lot about peace. You said peaceful relations across the Taiwan Strait. Peaceful means on the basis of international law and so on. So thank you for that.
Mr. Dubourg, I'm sorry, I have to interrupt you just briefly. It doesn't sound like the microphone on your headset is the one that's connected to your feed.
Yeah, let's try. Is it okay right now?
Now it's better, I think. Thank you.
Oh, okay. So sorry. Let me repeat, Chair. I'd like to welcome all witnesses tonight from the Bureau économique et culturel de Taipei au Canada. And I was saying, Mr. Singh, that I was so pleased to read your statement, especially your conclusion, because you talk a lot about peaceful means on the basis of international law, peaceful relations across Taiwan Strait and so on. So thank you for that. And but in that speech, you have said also about the CCP 20th Party Congress. You have said that the speech delivered on October 16 has sent a chilling message to all of us in the Democratic camp. Would you elaborate on that, please?
Thank you, sir. I think actually in my opening remarks, I have elaborated on what I mean by a chilling message to all of us in the like-minded group. So I pointed out that the economic message coming out of the 20th Party Congress is not very rosy at all. And I have given you the reason why I say that, because it is all in the political report that the zero COVID policy has been reaffirmed, and there is no hope of loosening control on the internet platforms. All those things. I think I'm looking at it only from the economic perspective. But I also mentioned when answering to one of the questions that the security concern out of this 20th Party Congress is something we need to pay close attention to, because a lot of the response from the, including from Secretary of State of the United States, Mr. Antony Blinken, and see it as Chinese threat to Taiwan has been moved forward in terms of its timeline. So we are trying to alert here people in Canada as well as the people in the like-minded countries that we shouldn't take the message in the 20th Party Congress lightly. We need to prepare and in order not to be harmed in the near future.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. And still on your statement, at the third paragraph, sir, you said that the CCP has instead stressed equality over prosperity. And by doing so, China is accelerating its self-initiated decoupling. And at the end, you said Canada should beware what awaits in the future. Do you have specific problems or threat in mind that you refer that we can be aware of?
Thank you, sir. Obviously, China is a very important market for Canada. It is the third biggest market, lagging behind the US, EU, and so what is happening in China, especially in the Chinese economy, I think is something of your great concern. And the reason I say they stress equality over prosperity, this is not, I'm only describing the message from the 20th Party Congress when Mr. Xi emphasized that common prosperity is their utmost objective of their government policy. Well, by common prosperity, it is not talking only about taxing people's income and to redistribute the wealth to the individuals. Well, even if in China it is by taxation, I must say that in a political system that emphasizes so much on political control, and that has no transparent, no balance, no check and balance in their system, it would only come to a situation when this redistribution of wealth becomes the source of corruption. And it has happened when Xi Jinping came to power 10 years ago. He actually used the first 10 years to purge a lot of political enemies by using the slogan of anti-corruption. Now, closing up their economy, trying to redistribute the wealth of the people, I don't think it's going to make anyone feel good, including their own people. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zhang. Thank you, Mr. Dubourg. Now,
Thank
for
you so much.
2.5 minutes, Mr. Bergeron.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'd like to pick up the questions and answers that we were having during my previous round of questions. We were talking about a hypothetical situation, and now let's move out of a hypothetical situation and look into facts. Have there been several ministerial visits from Western countries to Taiwan in recent years? And if so, which countries visited?
Thank you, sir. There's actually not many ministerial visits to Taiwan. most remarkably are the visit of the ministers from the United States. Only last year, I think it's, year 2000, their Secretary of Health went to Taiwan, visited Taiwan. And there's a lot of visit to Taiwan of ministers or even prime ministers who just stepped down from their office. So when we talk about ministerial meetings, it's not happening very often in Taiwan. That's true. That's true. It's not that Canada is the only country not sending their ministers to Taiwan. That should be made clear.
Mm-hmm. Le 3 août dernier.
Last August the 3rd, the G7 foreign ministers published a statement on maintaining peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. The declaration said that the People's Republic of China was invited to resolve the issues with peaceful means, and it said that there could be no change to politics for one China and change in G7 policies with Taiwan. How far does this statement go to being useful to you?
The statement from the G7 countries carries a lot of weight. As a matter of fact, this perhaps is the first time that in the G7's joint statement, when Taiwan Strait, the security and the peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait was mentioned, was included. It appeared first time last year, 2021. And then since that, that was a foreign minister meeting and the G7 summit meeting in London. And when this was first mentioned, it stayed. This becomes part of the G7's position. We appreciate that very much. We hope that this message will be always reiterated whenever there is a G7's meeting, because the importance of the fact that peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait continues to be the case. So we would welcome the G7's meeting to touch on this position every time they meet.
Thank you, Mr. Zhang. Thank you, Mr. Bergeron. And now for our final 2.5 minutes, Ms. McPherson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do want to thank our guests today. This has been wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Zhang. You know, we've talked about diplomacy, we've talked about trade, we've talked about what Canada can do more of, what Canada has done, security. You know, we are finding ourselves in a very changing world. What is happening in Ukraine has implications on Taiwan. What happened with COVID, and as we come out of the COVID pandemic, has implications to how China is responding, and the reality of what this looks like on the ground. And knowing that I have the last 2.5 minutes, I wonder if I could just pass it back to you and just say, is there anything else that you'd like to tell this committee? Anything else that you would like to get into the Hansard onto the record for the final few moments?
Thank you so much. That is a very kind words to me. I appreciate this opportunity to appear in this special committee. I know this is a committee set up for a special purpose. The reason you also invited me to be one of the witnesses tells me how much you concern and the importance you attach to our relations between Canada and Taiwan. I really hope that this is only the story that I can share with you for tonight, but the things are going on, and the situations are evolving. I look forward to future opportunities to engage every single member of you who are here and who are participating online. I honestly think that this is the historical juncture when the like-minded countries should work with each other in a way that we can come up with that kind of synergy. That because the challenge facing us is different from before. not many people are still appreciating that the surge or the assertive foreign policies out of China is going to change a lot of what we have experienced the past, say, 5 or 10 years. But it is going to be the case. Just for one example, in Taiwan, we think that the third term, the next 5 years under Xi Jinping's watch, he probably would be pressing further on Taiwan by ways unseen before. And the large exercise in the wake of Nancy Pelosi's visit, it may come back. As a matter of fact, that exercise, even though it's not declared again, is still there. Well, every day we have sorties, dozens of them, sometimes close to 100 of them, coming to our ADIZ, Air Defense Identification Zone, intimidating Taiwan, flying across the medium line of the Taiwan Strait, an imaginary medium line, and intimidating Taiwan on a daily basis. I hope this kind of situation would be paid attention to by our Canadian friends, because it wouldn't stop at Taiwan. Taiwan is not a Chinese domestic issue. Taiwan is an international issue. And so when it comes to Taiwan, we all have to suffer. I'm not even mentioning about Taiwan's chip-making capacity that we provide most of the chips to the important industries in the world. I'm not even talking about that. Of course, that is a very important part. But the fact that Taiwan, if Taiwan falls, democracy falls, that will be the ultimate concern of all of us.
And with that, sir, I really appreciate your attendance tonight, as do our committee members. To Mr. Ping, Mr. Zhang, and Mr. Chen, thank you again for being here with us tonight. We'll now take a brief break while
Monsieur le Président.
Yes.
Je me demandais si...
Chair, I was wondering whether there is any interest or unanimous consensus to be able to take a photograph with the Taiwan representatives and the members of this committee?
While we get the next panel set up, so I believe that would provide an opportunity if you wish. Absolutely. We'll
include those of us that are on screen.
Well, maybe we can pose in front of the screen, Ms. McPherson. I don't know, but we'll do our best with who we have here. And so for photos, we now take a break. pleased to welcome Scott Simon, Professor, University of Ottawa, and Senior Fellow, Macdonald-Laurier Institute. And for this round, committee members, we will do more of the standards, 6 minutes each for the first round. Second round, 5 minutes for Liberals, 5 minutes Conservative, 2.5 minutes each for the Bloc and the NDP, after which we will break then and go into a brief committee business session. So we would like to welcome you. Is it Mr. Simon or Dr. Simon? Dr. Simon, thank you for being here in person. That does eliminate the problems with some of the technical challenges we've had. We appreciate you being with us this evening, and we'd like you to take 5 minutes and give your opening statement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Of Taiwan Studies at the University of Ottawa. I've lived in Taiwan for over 10 years, including 5 years of research in Indigenous communities, where people are very grateful for 150 years of Canada-Taiwan relations that brought them Presbyterian and Catholic missions. The so-called Taiwan issue began with the post-war disposition of Japanese territories in the 1951 San Francisco Peace Treaty, when Japan declared the end of war and renounced all claims to Taiwan without specifying a recipient. At the time, Foreign Minister Lester Pearson said, "I hope possibly, in that eventual solution, some people who are overlooked in the matter, I mean the people of Formosa, might be given some consideration." In a way, democratization means that the Taiwanese people now exercise self-determination in every single election. Although the Republic of China brought an authoritarian state to Taiwan, democratization eventually allowed the Taiwanese to remake it in their own image. Taiwan is now a leader in such areas as LGBT rights and indigenous rights. Yet Chinese threats to invade and annex the island country prevent them from living free of fear. This is already a human rights issue. When China coerces Canada to marginalize Taiwan, moreover, it is also a violation of our sovereignty. Canadians often self-censor when it comes to Taiwan, but when we recognized the PRC in 1970 as the sole government of China, the government of Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau kept our options open with an agreement to neither endorse nor challenge the Chinese government's position on the status of Taiwan. So we need to avoid even the appearance of endorsing China's claim over Taiwan, even little things like the drop-down menus on some government websites. As a trading nation, Canada's first interest is a peaceful, free, and open Indo-Pacific. I think we have already covered the security and defense issues and FIPA and CPTPP and the international organizations. But I'd like to say that maybe the Indo-Pacific is also inclusive and sustainable. One of the areas that we have in common with Taiwan is on indigenous issues. I just spent the last 2 days with a delegation from the Taipei Indigenous Affairs Bureau. We also this year signed an agreement called IPETCA with Taiwan and Australia and New Zealand. So there are things going on there, and we once had an MOU with Taiwan on indigenous affairs. It is also a global good that some countries still have relations with Taiwan as the Republic of China. We can reinforce the peaceful status quo by cooperating with Taiwan on joint projects in such countries. Some of them might seem far away to most Canadians, like Palau, but others like Haiti are very important to us, and they also need our help, and so we can help with Taiwan. We could, for example, create joint projects with Taiwan in development assistance or even military or Coast Guard cooperation like peacekeeping, disaster relief, and search and rescue operations. Canada's policy is to neither challenge nor endorse China's claims to Taiwan. We cannot endorse them because they are political goals rather than descriptions of reality on the ground. We chose not to challenge because silence was needed to establish diplomatic relations with China. But that decision was based on assumptions that China and Taiwan would seek a peaceful resolution. Now, as one side gets increasingly aggressive, we need to emphasize that we do not endorse China's coercion. We may someday consider legislation like the U.S.-Taiwan Relations Act to provide guidance to Canadians on Canada-Taiwan relations. And I would say that even the universities need some guidance. In a worst-case scenario, Chinese aggression could even lead us to formally recognize Taiwan, just as we had to do with Kosovo, despite Russian and Serbian opposition to make sure that it's an international issue. And, you know, historically, we have especially during the Pearson time, looked at this as an international issue. We have to do whatever we can to do to prevent any conflict. I think that we're doing very good by consistently making the argument that we want to keep the peaceful status quo. So we have to signal to China that we're serious about keeping the peaceful status quo. Our silence about Taiwan was conditional on them refraining from aggression. Those days seem past. And we also need to assure our democratic allies and partners that we stand with them. That means Japan and the U.S. and others, and that Taiwan is a shared security issue. So I think that we need to work hard for peace because the alternative is unimaginable and the cost would be very high to Canada.
Thank you very much, Dr. Simon. And before we start our first round of questioning, I believe Ms. Rempel-Garner lurks there somewhere on Zoom. So if you are there she is. Good evening and welcome. So to Mr. Chong for 6 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Dr. Simon, for appearing in front of us today. You've written in a paper that you wrote that Canada should update its Taiwan strategy. And in particular, you said there could be situations in which international recognition of Taiwan becomes the best strategy to deter war, and Canada should lead the way. So do you think it's time for Canada to recognize Taiwan diplomatically? And if not, then at what point before a war, which seems imminent, between the People's Republic of China and Taiwan, what situation between now and that war would it be appropriate for Canada to recognize Taiwan diplomatically?
Yeah, I think obviously that's a very difficult question to answer, that it takes a lot of discussion in Canada about that. I hope that I'm not being too hopeful. I think that it would be premature right now to do that. And I think even those military exercises in August were not so threatening that we would need to do that yet. So I think that having some kind of a red line, that we have to be prepared to know what that is. And so this is going to take some discussion. But would that be flights directly over the island of Taiwan, for example? Would that be sufficient? In spite of the fact that we have relations with Ukraine, and the Ukraine has been in the UN for a long time, that didn't stop Russia from invading. So, having that relationship would not necessarily prevent a war. But I think that it would raise the cost to China of having a war, to let them really know that we're serious about Taiwan and we're willing as a global community to defend Taiwan.
Another recommendation you've made is that Parliament could enhance its role. So I assume that means you're also supportive of MPs going to Taiwan on these legislative exchanges.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct. And we've been sending these delegations to Taiwan since the 1970s. And many, many countries send these delegations to Taiwan. They're quite routine. And so I think we have to continue doing that.
Well, thank you for that. Another question I had is, what is your assessment of when China is going to invade Taiwan?
Yeah, I think that I don't have a when. The U.S. government has been recently saying some things. We're hearing, they used to say 1949, then it was 2049, then it was 2027. Now they're saying maybe 2023, maybe later this year. And I don't think that's really my place to try to figure out when they're going to do that. I think what we need to do, instead of trying to think about when they're going to do it, is trying to make sure that we can keep them pushing that back as far as we can. And
well, thank you. I know there was a bit of disbelief when the Biden administration suggested late last year that Russia was on the verge of invading Ukraine. And none of us wanted to believe that that was going to happen. And unfortunately, it did on February 24th. So, I take a bit more seriously now the analysis coming out of Washington about this potential. And so I think, we as parliamentarians have a job to do to game out various potential scenarios that could be taking place. So what do you share the Taiwanese representatives' view that by more closely engaging with Taiwan, both informally through legislator to legislator links, but also more formally through the negotiation of foreign investment protection and promotion agreements, as well as free trade agreements, that we increase the cost to Beijing of invading Taiwan?
All right. So basically, we're making the world that we live in with the agreements we make. And so I definitely agree with him that by having closer relations with Taiwan all across the board, so with FIPA, with the people-to-people relations, with the relations that the universities set up with other universities in Taiwan, that any of these relations that we have, people-to-people, even the work of the Presbyterian Church in Taiwan and the United Church of Canada, all of these things are really important for our ties, and they're important for really influencing the role that Taiwan plays in the world and making sure that it's stronger, and that's good for democracy.
One of the things you've stated in the past is that Canada, as have other democracies, has long assumed that China's Beijing's participation in international affairs has fostered peace. It increasingly is clear, though, that the People's Republic of China is willing to use military force and military coercion, even against Canada, in order to get its way. Do you think the Canadian government should be more explicit with Beijing about this problem? In other words, should our government be more directly saying to Beijing, the assumptions that we long held about you being a peaceful actor in the world are quickly eroding, and therefore we are going to reset our policy in the Indo-Pacific region based on that new reality?
Yeah, I think that Canada was instrumental in getting China into the United Nations system, and a big part of that, the argument was that excluding them from things is a threat to world peace. And so we brought them into it with the assumption that them joining the world system would lead to world peace and that there would be a peaceful resolution of the Taiwan Straits issues. And that's clearly not happening. And it's not just because of the threats against Taiwan, and it's not just because of the threats against Canada, which are happening. It's also the genocide that's happening in Xinjiang. It's also the threats against India, against Japan. And so I think we do have to make that very clear to China that any of their aggression is of serious and grave concern to Canada. And I think that we have to be educating Canadians about that as well.
Thank you, Dr. Simon. Thank you, Mr. Chong. Now to Mr. Oliphant for 6 minutes.
Chair, and thank you, Dr. Simon, for being here with us tonight. You said in your remarks, and I think you're correct in your understanding of Canada's first interest is a peaceful, free, and open Indo-Pacific. I think that would be our goal. And I think you also talk about ways to reinforce, perhaps reestablish, unfortunately, the peaceful status quo would be a goal that I think are in your remarks as well as the Canadian goal. In doing that, a recent witness at our committee, David Wright from University of Calgary, said, I'm going to quote, "Some of the steps that democratic countries, and I would add some opposition party members, wish to take towards protecting Taiwan's democracy may in fact achieve just the opposite result." He added, maybe doing the right thing is more a matter of not doing the wrong thing. I just want you to work with me a little bit on that, because we've had this system where we've attempted to neither endorse nor challenge the People's Republic of China's attitudes or actions with respect to Taiwan. They're pushing us. Some people have a response to push back. I worry at times that could cause more danger for the people of Taiwan. Finding that balance of pushing without endangering would be my goal. Could you help me a bit with that?
Yeah, I think this is a conversation that's ongoing and has been going on for a while. But I think that what often gets overlooked is that we have decided, and actually when the Secretary of External Affairs, Mitchell Sharp, negotiated with China, the Chinese actually agreed to this framework of neither endorsing or challenging. And sometimes I think we don't have to always do it publicly, but we have to remind the Chinese that we don't endorse their claims over Taiwan. So we have never accepted their claim. We took no, but we never accepted it. When it comes to concrete steps, though, I think that there are some things that could be overly provocative. But I think that, frankly, Canada should be less concerned about that than the United States, for example. China tends to perceive the United States as being an enemy country in many ways, but Canada does not really have the same threat to China. And so I think there are a lot of things that we could do that the Americans can't do, and I think we should be exploring that.
So a little bit more, we're talking about recognition of Taiwan in international fora as being an important. It does push back, but it is something we have been strong about encouraging their participation in places where they can add value, strengthening trading relationships and people-to-people ties. We keep doing that, and push on those boundaries. And I am very open to understanding more where else we could push without slamming the people of Taiwan because we have an ego need on there. It's really about the people. I would echo Mr. Pearson's comment about the people of Formosa. They're the ones that need to be engaged on this question. It's the people of Taiwan. So I don't want to hurt them. I want to push, but not hurt. How do we do that?
I think that the way that we do that is by engaging them wherever we can, but often working on things where we have values in common. So on the indigenous issues, for example, both countries, we've got same-sex marriage, LGBT rights is something. They've got a very high percentage, as a woman as president, a high percentage of legislators, so on feminist issues. So our feminist foreign policy should have something there. Some of the things on sustainable development, maybe working with Taiwan on some of their development projects in other countries like Haiti or in Oceania, and reinforcing them in ways that are below the radar screen for China in many ways, but which are still helpful.
I'm often fond of reminding people that former President Ma, as mayor of Taipei, was the first Asian mayor to establish a gay pride. And it's something that we value in Canada, so we will encourage that, and we will find ways to do that, which I never mind irking China, but protecting Taiwan at the same time would be the balance we'd try to find there. And I'm also glad you mentioned Mitchell Sharp, my first political mentor, who I think that concept of neither accepting the concept of that China had about Taiwan, but finding ways to challenge it appropriately would be the other thing. With respect to the peaceful status quo, do you think we have a peaceful status quo? Do we have an unpeaceful status quo, or do we have a dangerously precarious status quo?
I think we've got a very precarious peace right now.
Precarious peace.
Right, and I would say that because of peace being the absence of war, there are, of course, gray zone tactics going on, just short of war, and I think those exercises in August were a good example of that. And so I think that they're trying to get the world accustomed to that.
And the placing of a Canadian frigate through the strait at that time?
Yeah, that's. I think that's a signal to China that we're very concerned.
We did that. Thank you. Thanks, Mr.
Thank you
Chair.
very much, Mr. Oliphant. We'll now go to Mr. Bergeron for 6 minutes or less.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. If I may, Mr. Simon, I would like to continue the line of questioning of my colleague, Mr. Oliphant. Last February, the Director General of Weldon Epp of Global Affairs Canada came to this committee and repeated Canada's position in terms of the fact that Canada doesn't support China's claims on Taiwan, but does not challenge them either. Neither endorse nor challenge. So now it's all about nuance, but you said a few moments ago that even if we're not challenging, we never accepted them. So in your mind, what's the difference between not challenging China's claims to Taiwan and not accepting them? You know, supporting but not accepting.
Je pense qu'il y a une grande.
Well, I think there's a big difference. Not contesting means, well, to establish relations with China, China asked that recognition of Taiwan as part of Canada is what should be done. And Mr. Sharp said, no, that's not possible because Taiwan is not part of China. So just the fact that China asked Canada to do that is already a proof. China did not ask for Canada to recognize Shandong as being part of China, and Canada did not ask China to recognize that Alberta is part of Canada. So not challenging is to have relations with China. But not supporting, not endorsing, not approving, that's because it's a question of fact. China is not part of China. Taiwan is not part of China, so we cannot support that position. Sorry if I have to keep coming back to this, but it seems very important to me. When you don't accept a state of fact, isn't that a de facto contestation of that state of facts? Well, I think that's a very diplomatic formulation because, in fact, that is contesting or challenging very clearly this claim of China's that Taiwan belongs to China. I think it was a diplomatic convention that was necessary in 1970 in order to have diplomatic relations with China. So if I've understood you correctly, you're saying that, in fact, Canada is challenging China's claims to Taiwan, but is pretending not to. Yes, it's fiction. And even the Supreme Court, I think in Quebec, 18 years ago, there was a judgment in François Parent versus Singapore Airlines. And they said it's a diplomatic fiction. And courts do not have to continue with that fiction. So our society does not need to keep this fiction. Well, that's very interesting, Mr. Simons. So how did Quebec's court challenge the fiction? They said that it was only for that very specific framework because there was a train crash at the Taipei airport. And Mr. François Parent sued and the Aviation Council in Taiwan. And so the Quebec Superior Court had to decide whether Taiwan was or wasn't in that. And in that situation, they said, yes, it is a state in this situation. Very interesting. Now, in your article, Understanding Relations Between Canada and Taiwan, Why Does Canada Need a New Strategy to Contribute to Make Peace in the Taiwan Strait, which was in October, published last October, you said that Canada should update its Taiwan strategy by organizing direct party-to-party discussions with government representatives, former diplomats, academics, and think tanks from Canada and Taiwan. As my colleague was saying, Parliament could also strengthen its role, even perhaps following Japan's example and beginning party-to-party relations on Taiwanese security. How would Japan's example inspire Canada? Well, I think there are a lot of areas where the Taiwan-Japan relationship could inspire Canada. One example that I gave in my report is that they held a security dialogue regarding between political parties for the security of France. It was not nation to nation. It wasn't Minister of Defense to Minister of Defense, but party to party. So we could do something with the Liberal Party and Taiwan's Democratic Party. But when Ms. Guo was in Taiwan with a delegation, there was a parade. And members of Japan's parliament participated directly in the parade, which was celebrating the the Republic of China's holiday in Taiwan. So they contributed by being in the parade. And Canadian parliamentarians did not participate in that parade. They were spectators. And are you suggesting that Canadian members of parliament should have taken part in the parade? I think it would perhaps be a good idea for the future.
I'll come back.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Ms. McPherson now for 6 minutes or less.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What a fascinating conversation we're having. Thank you very much, Mr. Simons, for being here and sharing this with us. You know, I think all of us are trying to find ways for Canada to make sure that, or to do what we can to ensure that there is peace in Taiwan. That this is everybody's goal, I think. And so when you talk about things like working on sustainable development goals, when you talk about ways we can work with them in terms of development assistance, those things are, of course, music to my ears. And I do know that you are a specialist in terms of Indigenous relations in Taiwan. What does it mean that Taiwan is not able to participate in the United Nations? What do we lose when we can't learn from Taiwan at the United Nations on things like UNDRIP, on things like Indigenous relations?
We're losing because we don't have Taiwan in the EU. And I think with the representative talked a bit about that with the WHO and so forth. But in addition to that, I would say that, talking about Indigenous issues, that there are issues of Indigenous rights in Taiwan that are unresolved. For example, the rights of Indigenous people to hunt according to their traditions, because in many cases hunting has been criminalized. And because they're not a part of the UN, it means that the citizens, the people of Taiwan, including the Indigenous peoples, don't have access to the Special Rapporteur of Indigenous Rights, and they don't have full access to the Permanent Forum. When they go to it, and they go to it every year, they're in the side events. And it would be an advantage to the Indigenous peoples if they could actually have full access to the United Nations proceedings on Indigenous rights.
Thank you. Well, and you also talked about universities, and you talked in your speech about universities needing more additional guidance, and that sort of piqued my attention. What did you mean by that, and what kind of guidance do they require?
What I was thinking about there, and I was hoping that somebody would ask that, is as chair of Taiwan Cities, we've generally had no problem at all, and no pressure from China at all, but it did happen once. And that was in the year 2015 when we had a guest speaker, Dr. Andrew Young, who was a political scientist and sociologist who came and talked about the role of the Republic of China in World War II. And the some assistant put the flag of the Republic of China on the website as part of the advertisement. And the embassy actually contacted the university and just bombarded the administration all the way up to the president of the university with emails and phone calls about this. And so they were quite concerned, the university was quite concerned that they would cancel an event that was coming up, a signing ceremony with the Academy of Science. And I was actually told by one of our vice deans that in the future that we should avoid using any language or symbol that would upset the embassy of the People's Republic of China. And so that's what I was thinking about, that we really need guidance from the government, in fact, that would tell the universities that they don't take orders from foreign embassies.
Which is of course difficult to do, and when we are trying not to say anything at all sometimes, or the government is trying not to say anything at all. You did talk a little bit about development assistance and how Canada, one thing Canada could do is work with Taiwan on support for Haiti. Of course, that's a subject that we're studying in the Foreign Affairs Committee right now. Obviously, what's happening in Haiti is in dire need of humanitarian assistance. Can you tell me a little bit about other ways that Canada could work with Taiwan with regards to international development, what Taiwan's priorities are, and perhaps point out a little bit about where Taiwan's level of development assistance support is at? You know, how do they play a role in the world, and can Canada learn from them?
Yeah, so they do have international development assistance, and it's focused, of course, on the countries that have diplomatic relations with the Republic of China, and they actually do recognize the government in Taipei as being the government of China, which is a bit anachronistic in itself in some ways, but it's still useful because that means that Taiwan doesn't have to declare independence from the Republic of China. Obviously, they don't, but anyway, getting back to the development one, that there are so many places in Africa. They are now down to one country in Africa, Eswatini. But I think that it would be very useful to work with them on development projects, and Haiti is a good example of that, and remind these other countries, such as Haiti, that we're doing this, and we're very happy that you have this relation that you have with China, with the Republic of China. And I think that that's part of the peaceful or the precarious peace that we have there, is that there are still some countries that recognize the ROC as the government of China. And, I was at a conference and there was a professor from the Chinese Academy of Social Science who was asked, what would happen if China poached away all of the allies of Taiwan? And that professor said, we can't let that happen, because if that did happen, then Taiwan would have no other choice but to declare independence. And so I think that this strange situation in which a handful of countries recognize them as the government of China is actually a stabilizing force. And, we can kind of shore that up by working with Haiti and Palau and Nauru and all of these small countries on that.
Ms.
Do you see
McPherson, I'm sorry, you are out of time.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
We'll go to our second round. Mr. Kmitch for 5 minutes.
So thank you, Mr. Chair. I was going to go on the university's question because you said you needed some guidance. You didn't really go into very much on what type of guidance that would be. So can you just expand on that? Is it just instructions on how to deal with foreign embassies, or is there anything more to it?
I think it should be a little bit more to that. And, it's not just, it's the universities, but it's the whole university, the research ecology that we live in. I mentioned drop-down menus because on the SSHRC application form, when you talk about cooperating with other countries and you use the drop-down menu, it says Taiwan Province of China. And so that makes it appear as if the government of Canada endorses China's claim over Taiwan. And so I think we should have some guidelines so that universities, other education institutions, but the whole research network that we have falls in line with Canada's policy and doesn't appear to fall in line with China's policy.
Okay, so recently in August this year, the Alberta government loosened some of the restrictions it had introduced on Alberta-based universities and polytechnics, how they could interact with the Chinese government. But they left certain restrictions in place, restrictions such as signing new agreements involving visiting researchers, postdoctoral fellows, as well as arrangements for research, commercialization, technology transfers, and intellectual property. In those situations, the universities are prohibited from signing new agreements or continuing agreements that were there before. Are those the types of guidance that should be given to universities all across Canada to watch the types of relationships they're building long term with institutions based in mainland China, or should they perhaps favor relationships with Taiwan universities?
So I was thinking more in terms, I'm in agreement with the fact that there needs guidance with relations with China as well. But I think that sometimes universities are very hesitant about relations with Taiwan. And I've been working on that at the University of Ottawa for 20 years, and we're very successful. We have MOUs with many universities in Taiwan. But it took a lot of work to get that done. And actually, Taiwan is one of the priority countries for the University of Ottawa. But there are universities that are very timid about that because they're afraid it would endanger their cooperation with China. And I think our experience at the University of Ottawa is that it does not endanger our relations with China. We can have relations with both sides.
So then I have a question for you. Would it be helpful then for Canada to pass like a simple framework legislation, as certain parties like to call it, that would be like a Canada-Taiwan Official Relations Act that would kind of lay out, give that signal to the universities in Canada, like a more positive signal rather than like the negative signal, don't do this, positively say, we would like you to pursue closer relationships with universities in Taiwan, polytechnics as well, colleges, and this would be beneficial to the people-to-people relationship between Canadians and people of Taiwan. Is that something that would help us?
I think that a legislation on Canada-Taiwan relations would be very helpful. And I think it's important to be very clear that this is for creating guidelines for Canadians within the protocol that we already have.
Okay. And this type of legislation, do you think it needs to be like very in-depth or just like a value statement, framework, general pieces? I know that the U.S.-Taiwan Relations Act is very in-depth. It goes into like the military security relationship. Should ours do so as well, or should it keep itself to more civilian aspects of our relationship?
No, I think that that's something we're going to have to be discussing about in the years to come. But I think that it should be rather detailed and in depth about various aspects of our relations with Taiwan across the side, and that would, of course, include defense.
Okay. How much time do I have left? 15 seconds, 20 seconds? 50 seconds, perfect. On the people-to-people relationship, because I asked a representative here before, on the question of intimidation happening in Canada, it's something that I've been asking at almost every meeting that I can. Are you aware of any intimidation of citizens, visitors to Canada, people who are trying to do business here on behalf of Taiwanese companies in maybe trying to reach a deal with a Canadian university, and that there's interference from a foreign source, namely the People's Republic of China embassies or the consulates?
Well, our students from Hong Kong, Taiwan, we have Uyghur students, we have Tibetan students, and they report that there is interference and there are threats against them.
Thank you, Dr. Simon, and thank you, Mr. Kimmich. Now we'll go to Mr. Cormier for 5 minutes or less.
Merci, Monsieur Simard, d'être avec nous ce soir.
Thank you, Mr. Simon, for being with us tonight. It's a very interesting conversation. Now, some of the questions have already been asked by my colleagues, but there's something that piqued my curiosity, and it's about Indigenous rights. And I think you do some research on this subject. Now, I read earlier in a note that there was certain Indigenous groups were excluded in the Taiwan process. Could you explain to us a little bit? Are there any similarities between what's happened here in Canada with our Indigenous peoples versus the Taiwanese Indigenous peoples? What are the problems that you see? Because it's a rather interesting topic. Well, I just finished a book on the subject. It's the second book that I've written on Indigenous peoples. Now, there are some similarities in terms of the history. The loss of territory, the difficulties in having recognition of sovereignty of Indigenous peoples. Several issues are quite similar. Now, in some ways, I think Taiwan does better than Canada. For example, all Taiwanese Indigenous communities can access electricity and water, and that's not the case in Canada. Thank you. Well, my question also was that some groups were excluded from the Council of Indigenous Peoples. There were 10 or 12 groups. Why were they excluded? You're talking about the UN, like the Permanent Forum. Taiwan is excluded from all UN bodies. It's a contradiction with the very purpose of the Standing Forum on Indigenous Peoples. At the UN, normally, Indigenous peoples should have direct access to the UN. There should not be state interference. And this principle is not being respected in Taiwan's case. Now, you also said that we should do everything possible to prevent conflict or war. Now, in this committee, I'm very interested in anything related to trade relations and the economy of our country, as well as the global economy that could also suffer. What is the biggest threat to the Canadian economy, to your mind, if there were to be a conflict between China and Taiwan? Well, it would be a catastrophe, an economic catastrophe for Canada and for the whole world. Because if ever there were to be a conflict, not even an invasion, but even an embargo against Taiwan, we would lose access to the Taiwan ports and to China. We risk losing our investments in China as well as imports that are not just coming from Taiwan, but also come from China, because it would block marine transport. And this is a question I often ask of our witnesses, and I think that all members of the committee agree that human rights must be the absolute priority. But in terms of the economy, can we get around having China as a trade partner at some point? I think China is a huge country with a very large population. Right now, we see that there is a tendency for China to decouple itself from the world economy. China's doing it. It's not coming from the West. I think that in the long run, China needs our world and the world needs China. I think in the long term, it's very important to have China integrated with the world. And if you had any recommendations to make to this committee when it comes to what Canada could do differently or better, if there were to be 1 or 2 points, what would they be? Well, I think we need to do more to support Taiwan, but also in collaboration with other states in the region. I think we could perhaps even improve our relations with Japan, because for Japan, the Taiwan question is a very important one, and we should work more closely with Japan in terms of the peace and stability in the region. Thank you very much. I wanted to congratulate you for your excellent French, by the way.
Thank you, Mr. Cormier. Now to Mr. Bergeron for 2.5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. I second my colleague's comment, and thank you very much, Mr. Simon, for speaking French in the questions asked of you in the language of Molière, and your French is impeccable. I'd like to get back to the Japan question. People have talked about party-to-party security dialogue. Concretely speaking, you talked about party-to-party relations, but what does this bilateral security dialogue mean, and what results does it give? Well, it's something that's just started really in Japan, and I think the most important impact is that it makes the regional situation public, and it demonstrates how important Japan thinks the Taiwan Strait issue is. This also involves Japanese islands, which are just beside Taiwan. And to your mind, what would this party-to-party dialogue lead to? I'm talking about specifically the security dialogue. Well, I think it demonstrates to the world and to China that we are ready to work together with Taiwan to protect Taiwan. Now, obviously, there's U.S. and Japan who are leading, but we could do something as well. What could we do? Well, I don't think it's what we're necessarily already doing with Japan, joint exercises, but I think it could begin with perhaps small initiatives. For example, we could do something with the Coast Guard, maybe. Some sort of smaller projects, AT or Polar.
On aura d'autres occasions.
We'll have other opportunities. Thank you.
So the cleanup batter is at the plate. The winning run is on base. Ms. McPherson, the final 2.5 minutes.
I do always get to play that role, don't I, Mr. Chair? Well, and I will finish. I will finish. I think by following up on some of the questions Mr. Bergeron was asking you. You know, we do know that the Indo-Pacific strategy is coming. We've been told time and again. I assume at some point it will come. What would you like to see in it? What, with regards to Taiwan, what would you say is a successful Indo-Pacific strategy for Taiwan when we do see it? What advice would you give, if you could, to to our foreign minister?
Important to be very specific in that and say that we support peace and security in the Taiwan Straits and no unilateral aggression. And so I hope that the Indo-Pacific strategy shows a clear support for Taiwan.
And you spoke about our relations, you know, the fact that Japan has this important role to play in that. You spoke how Japan has taken sort of a leadership on this. What other countries should we be working with predominantly to continue that work, I guess, in addition to Japan, of course?
Yeah. I think that there are other countries in the area where we have a large diaspora. So, for example, the Philippines, and I think that those countries should be priorities in Vietnam. Another area where we have a special role to play would be in Oceania because of our French and English heritage, and so we can communicate with those people in those countries.
Thank you. Any other comments before we conclude this evening?
No, thank you very much for this. I think it's very important that we recognize that we really already have a relationship with Taiwan that's independent of our relationship with the People's Republic of China, and we have to keep working with that in mind.
Thank you very much, and thanks for coming today and sharing all of this perspective with us.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, that's all for me.
Thank you, Ms. McPherson and Dr. Simon. Thank you very much for attending this evening. It's getting late, but we do appreciate your time very much. We will now pause. There is, for people on Zoom, there's a link being sent right now. We will be back in a couple of minutes for a brief in-camera. Yes, Mr. Chong.
Yeah, just on a point of order, at the beginning of the meeting, our witness, Dr. Medeiros, who was supposed to appear, couldn't, and it seems there was a miscommunication between the technicians that tested his equipment earlier and what was required at this committee. So I just want to make sure that next time that inconsistency is not there, so that we don't have to deny a witness their
Actually,
ability to
yeah,
appear.
in that respect, Mr. Chong, we were pushing the boundaries of what was acceptable audio from Dr. Medeiros. You know, we did a test early. It was marginal, but we consulted with our translators, and we decided that, you know, especially given the risks that they are facing, that we would be better to ensure that Dr. Medeiros had the proper gear, and we'll invite him back.
Well, can I just make a suggestion that we make that the default rule for all witnesses, that they have the proper gear? So that
Yeah, it is the default rule, given, again, some of
'Cause he
the
implied it
difficulties that
wasn't.
we spoke about before, about getting witnesses to appear at our committee at this time of the day. We thought we could maybe do it, but in fact, at the end of the day, we could not, which is why Dr. Simon had to carry the panel all by himself.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
But I do appreciate your intervention on that, and I think our lesson is learned, yes, that without the proper gear, the person will not attend.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Right, thank you. We will take a break and back in camera in just a moment.
you.